People, and let's get started now. Good afternoon, everyone, and Ramadan Kareem. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Deborah, and I'm the head of membership and professional development at MEIRA, the Middle East Investor Relations Association. On behalf of MEIRA and our CEO, Paolo Casamassima, who sends his regrets as he is unable to join today due to an unavoidable business travel. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to MEIRA IR Academy. The initiative of the MEIRA IR Academy has been launched to go the extra mile for our members and to provide you with a comprehensive program covering a wide range of topics which will hopefully be able to cater to members of any level of seniority, from senior IROs to executives, but also for those perhaps who are just starting their IR journey. I'm pleased to say that currently we have a calendar of 38 topics running throughout the year on most Wednesdays and at a start time of 12:30 p.m. Dubai. And we hope to see many of you throughout the year. For today's session, we have over 50 attendees, and I can see people continuing to join, so thank you all very much. And without further ado, now it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's topic, Unlocking a Winning IR Program, and to our speaker, Amani Korayeim. A brief introduction of Amani. Amani Korayeim is the Director of Corporate Product and Partnerships Europe, EMEA at Extel, leading corporate IR products, strategic partnerships, and market expansion in the Middle East and Africa. With over 13 years of experience in investor relations, she works closely with IR and executive teams to shape engagement strategies. Amani serves on the UK IR Society's Best Practice Committee and has been part of the judging panel for the SEMF Awards at Saudi Capital Markets Forum since 2020. Amani holds a certificate for investor relations, well done Amani, from the UK IRS, and a BSc in Economics and Politics from Queen Mary University, London. As always, we would like to encourage an interactive session, and I'm sure Amani will pause throughout the presentation for Q&As. We will also have a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the session. However, feel free to put your questions through the chat box or by raising your hand at any point of time. Amani, the room is all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and a warm welcome, everybody, to the MEIRA IR Academy and this workshop on unlocking a winning IR program, key practices and emerging trends in investor relations. Deborah has already kindly introduced me quite comprehensively, so I'm not going to talk about what I do, but why we're here today, and ultimately why it is important to deliver best in class in investor relations. And it's a really exciting topic, and a topic that is actually close to my heart. But ultimately, you as IROs, and I've seen the attendee list, there are obviously quite a large number of heads of IR and investor relations offices, and potentially also people that are coming new to this role. So IR is a competitive advantage. So you are the competitive advantage, especially considering your landscape and the investors that you're engaging. When you consider that they're covering, over 100 stocks, really, and even more. I think it's now reaching around 300 stocks that a typical PM covers. So you need to be mindful of that kind of competitive landscape and need to resource yourself accordingly. Very often, we're still seeing IR teams and functions that are regarded as cost centers with very limited understanding internally of actually the tangible and strategic value that investor relations can actually deliver. So with a very effective and well-executed IR program, it really is a value driver and can impact the company in many ways. So if you really produce a strong and robust IR program, you change market perception and you can impact market valuation as a result. With effective and consistent and transparent IR, you also have the ability to instill confidence and trust with the investor community, give more confidence in your investment opportunity, and also which can result into lower cost of capital. By interacting regularly with the market as an IR function alongside to your management, that engagement and that regular interaction is very often associated with an increase in trading volume, therefore liquidity. And with high liquidity, you can reduce volatility, and then you become a much more, attractive investment opportunity for the investor community. And of course, attracting long-term institutional investors, really key to what you're doing in investor relations, which again leads to stable capital inflow, because these investors are obviously investing on a much longer investment horizon, which gives much more, predictability around your funding. And good IR can also really open doors to potential new financing opportunities, whether this is within the equity or debt issuances, but, having access to better financing options, lower interest rates, improved terms, all of that obviously helps in increasing investor interest, and is really part and parcel of what you can deliver in terms of investor relations, a direct impact on the strategy and the direction of the company. So it's really important that what you're doing is also aligned with your management and with the business goals. So today we'll be unpicking what's some really of the building blocks in IR are. So we look at, as Deborah mentioned, this should be interesting for people that are starting out in IR, that have been in IR for a long time and have now received the mandate to kind of, expand and professionalize the role. But understanding what, IR can actually do and the impact it has is really quite important. And we will be looking at, structural elements. We will be looking at interaction, challenges, targeting, and also other aspects within the realm of investor relations. And to accompany us through this event here today, and to share valuable and tangible insights and really firsthand experiences, are two very special individuals who have very, different backgrounds, which makes it even more interesting. But in their capacity of IR professionals, have received many Extel awards and recognitions and from other industry accolades, and are recognized by their stakeholders for their relentless commitment to delivering best-in-class in investor relations. And I would love to introduce you and welcome Gülsen Ayaz, Head of IR and Sustainability at Turk Telekom, and Nick Stone, Senior Vice President, Head of IR at Fresenius in Germany. Could I, both of you, and thank you very much for joining us here. I know you have a very busy, obviously, calendar and schedule. I really appreciate your time here and the insights that you will be sharing with us. If I can ask you very quickly to introduce yourself to the audience. Some of you may know, others may not know you, so it will be a great opportunity to hear from you very briefly. Gülsen, if we start with you, please, and then Nick.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you all, and I'm very excited about the discussion. I'm Gülsen Ayaz, heading Investor Relations and Sustainability at Turk Telekom for over the last 5 years. And prior to that, I've been around for quite some time now. I was in sell side for quite long years, doing both research, specialist sales, and sales and trading. Thank you.
Well, let me only echo the gratitude. So thank you very much for having us. From my perspective, I've been in healthcare, dare I say it, for over 25 years now. So I've joined AstraZeneca as a lawyer, but my background is predominantly, I guess, corporate, right? So I've done a lot of different things, from corporate strategy, business development, commercial roles. Was 5 years with AstraZeneca in their investor relations team during a very rough period when there was an acquisition or attempted acquisition by Pfizer. Then quickly moved to GSK and was head of IR through a deconsolidation, so a spin out of a consumer healthcare company. And then recently joined, having done 10 years of UK PLC investor relations, now joined a German DAX 40 company to get a different experience and perspective, as quite frankly, I continue my own development in terms of a more rounded healthcare experience, but also as an IRO.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both. And because I've also seen a few new names on the list who I wasn't actually familiar with, I think it may be useful for us to briefly introduce Extel, which some of you may still know as Institutional Investor Research. We've just recently rebranded. We've been a leader in independent performance evaluation for the last 50 years and have been very central to capital market performance evaluation across the sell side, corporates, and buy side in 6 different regions. Each year, we gather detailed feedback from these 3 constituencies or groups of capital market participants who basically assess their respective counterparts as part of our annual research. Excuse me. And this independent research is quite critical for the company's annual performance reviews, and because it produces a comprehensive gap analysis that highlights the strengths and weaknesses across various performance metrics. And this is particularly important also for the MEIRA audience here, because the results that we are receiving based on the buy-side and sell-side feedback on corporates in the Middle East really contributing every year to the MEIRA IR Awards, which will be held later this year in September. So we're very excited about that. And I have some updated information with respect to voter statistics and how the survey went for the MENA region to see who are the winning countries and sectors. And I will be sharing those insights at the end of the presentation. So please stick around. And as before we go in, excuse me, my voice keeps cracking. But before we go into the industry best practices and trends, I wanted to share with you some insights as well about sort of the survey scope. So you have that, and Deborah will be sharing the presentation later on as well, so you can basically review all of those insights in your own time. I think the important thing is to recognize that, you know, it's a large audience that participates in providing this feedback on best practices in investor relations. There were last year over 523 corporate IR individuals that contributed feedback on various subject matters within investor relations. And we captured all of the information here. So you can kind of see what the geographic regional breakdown is, what the sectorial breakdown is, by market segmentation, how we basically segment the market. So this is all really to kind of frame, you know, the results that we are sharing with you here today. For some of the benchmarks that I will be highlighting throughout the presentation, this area is really important to kind of understand what we define as the MENA region, that is based on the companies from those countries that have actually contributed feedback. So you can see here Bahrain, Egypt, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi, and the UAE. And then the top EMEA companies. So this is basically the creme de la creme based on our Extel ranking analysis. So these are the companies collectively that represent these 4 countries where they have produced the top performing IR teams and executive management teams. And we look at, you know, what their structures, what their team structures and budgets and interactions with the market looks like as a benchmark. So you can review this in your own time. The first thing that I wanted to focus on to kind of frame really where we are at the moment in terms of investor relations challenges, but also priorities. So we're looking really at what you can see here on the screen are, you know, the key areas that IR is really addressing and challenged by. We can see that obviously the macroeconomic environment has an impact. It's something that you can't really, you know, change or shape, but you can certainly change and shape the response that you take as a corporate IR team to position the company within the macroeconomic backdrop. Sell side coverage, modeling, consensus, these are all areas that cause also challenges for companies in the MENA region, which we will also unpick. And then, of course, targeting is a huge area that still requires a lot of help and assistance for corporate IR teams to improve their ability to engage and target potential new investors, but also obviously nurture existing relationships. We'll also be picking up on liquidity, investor feedback, and other areas within those top challenges that have been mentioned. In terms of priorities, again, it's really reflecting kind of addressing some of those problems that they're facing, improving and enhancing targeting abilities, but also increasing market engagement. Feedback is one of the top 3 priorities. Feedback is really critical and important, and we will be talking about this later on as well as looking at ESG, which remains still of importance, but also internal stakeholder engagements and AI capabilities. So these are really sort of trying to really frame what we're trying to look at here today. And in terms of now really starting off, if you think about, you know, you're moving into a new team, or potentially you're setting up a totally new team post IPO, it is really important that you are aligning your IR goals with the expectations of management, and also where the business is really going directionally. So it is really important for IR to have a very robust framework that you can use to measure the investor relations performance. And I think that has to be kind of the foundation of where you start off. It's important that you have the ability to evaluate the effectiveness of the communication with the investors, to kind of understand what the strengths and weaknesses of your efforts are, that you have the ability to kind of, obtain feedback and address investor concerns and feedback, strengthening, and building the relationships with your investor community. Obtaining that perception and investor sentiment is really important for you, not only to kind of, proactively manage, situations or engagement with your investors, but you're also mitigating potential reputational risk as well. So this is all important as part of that. The feedback that you're obtaining is also really critical for management to obtain on a regular basis, because that helps them understand what the investors are focusing on, what their investor preferences are, what the trends are, and all of these aspects can really feed into moving and shaping the business strategy as well. And finally, in terms of, again, measuring IR and why it is important, not only tracking your investor relations activities, but also having the ability to kind of benchmark that with industry peers to understand what is the standard, what is the benchmark that we need to achieve here. And these are all, aspects that really are quite important for you to set up from the get-go, so you can actually track your performance and the development and the progress that you're doing across different areas within IR. Now, how do we measure investor relations? So there are various aspects, and I'm going to, come to Gülsen and Nick to get their feedback on that as well. Of course, there's stock performance metrics that you can use, but there's a lot more than IR that can actually impact the stock performance. So it cannot be an isolated and only way to do that. Investor engagement, assessing sort of market reactions to any kind of disclosures or presentations or events that you're hosting, obtaining feedback, and of course tracking long-term performance. What you're seeing on the screen now is basically by country within the MENA region, and also our top EMEA corporates, how they're actually using the Extel ranking to measure and to track their performance. So you can see some of the companies have very aggressive targets in terms of obtaining, very high rankings in the survey. So you can see that here for Bahrain or Egypt, for instance, they're really aiming for the top 5. Within Kuwait, we see a mixture of the top 5. But it's really interesting to see that this is something that is becoming more important to use as an independent kind of source of, validating their performance. When we look at some of the best performers within the region, so Turkey, the UAE, Saudi, you can see that the percentage of, and also Greece, by the way, the percentage of companies that actually have to achieve a top 3 is actually quite significant. It's a bit scary because it's not that easy to get on there. So you have to have, a really strong and robust IR program to be seen in that way. I want to come to both Gülsen and Nick on that. In terms of sort of tracking, IR performance and having, a kind of framework in place, what are the kind of metrics that you use, that you have agreed with management on, that are, valuable to you guys and have been established? Gülsen, if you start first, please.
Yeah, sure. I think, it would be fair to start saying that not all of what IR does is quantifiable and measurable, but there are some ways, obviously, that we can look into it in order to understand how we are doing relative to the competitors or the environment. So some of the tools that we use, and as you can see in here, Turkey has got that 50%, and that we are amongst those companies that use Extel as a benchmark, and thanks for running that survey on a consistent basis. The other things we look into is peer analysis, because I think the absolute stock performance is can be a little bit, less controllable, but the peer analysis and your multiples versus the peer is a good indication of how you're doing, at least to your relative to your competitors. Obviously, we do look into stock performance as well relative to the benchmark index, and if there are things that we can explain that are obvious for outperformance or underperformance, not related to IR, then we highlight that. But we do think that some of the gap in those benchmark measures is also related with IR activities as well, and particularly when IR is more active in its activities, we can capture those kind of performance differences. I think the other thing we look into is the engagement with the investors, and how many meetings we do on a one-on-one basis or in conferences, and we try to gather as much feedback directly from the investors as we can. But I think also going back and asking the sell-side conference, organizers, about your performance and what the investors said about in those meetings, or about those meetings in the aftermath of those interactions, is a good way of, collecting feedback, I think. So those are the benchmark, studies that we are trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Nick, can you give us your thoughts on that? Because you've obviously been part of different teams. Maybe there were different approaches as well.
Yeah, no, I think what would be consistent across all of the teams that I've worked in is, I think you've got a very quantitative perspective. So we can look at, obviously, share price accretion. We can look at market cap development. I think that doesn't really tell the full story. So inevitably, as Gulsen's just talked about, the importance of benchmarking relative to peers is super important. And I think, I spend a lot of time and have spent a lot of time previously looking at both the Extel, but also in the UK. We were privileged as having another data point with IR Magazine. In Germany, we have Dirk, and we have some other data points. And I think understanding where perception differs relative to your baseline, i.e. if another company has a better level of disclosure, then I would immediately start in a place of what are they doing that's different to us, and can we learn something from that perspective? Likewise, I'm very quantitative driven when I think about the effectiveness of our own program. So just to give you a sense of magnitude, both from an AstraZeneca and GSK perspective, remember these are mega cap companies, so they're running very extensive IR programs. So when we think about quantum in terms of activity levels, GSK, when I left last year, we were doing 1,900 events a year, right? So from a 30-minute call all the way through to a 500-600 person event. Now, it's not about the number per se, but I think then when you look at it through the lens of, are we actually putting ourselves in front of the people that we want to meet? This is where targeting becomes incredibly important. So with the work that we've done with a third-party service provider, inevitably, and Amani knows this well from conversations we've had in the past, targeting for me is something that is much more of an art. It's not a science. And as a consequence of sort of how we structure our program, we sit there and say, okay, we've got tier one. So our tier one investors, let's say for argument's sake, there's maybe 100, and we set a very arbitrary figure, which is we're going to meet 100. We're going to meet 100% of those. Tier two, maybe 80%. Tier three, maybe 70%. But the point is really that we can then manage our outreach. We can't obviously measure we can measure whether those people buy, but we can't enforce or we can't make those people buy. And this is why I think you have to have a sort of a composite approach or a portfolio approach, because meeting people or being in front of people, as I say, doesn't necessitate that they will purchase, and you won't see that in your market cap or share price accretion. So I think it's about the effectiveness of your program. You can then overlay that with qualitative feedback. If say, for example, being in Germany right now, one very small thing that we did was move our reporting from 7 a.m. Central European time to 6:45. Why did we do that? Because it meant that we had a very small window ahead of the competition. The feedback that we got, it's not going to move the share price, but everybody appreciated that very small window where they had a little bit more time to review our materials. So I think you have to take a systematic approach, but then also think about more low-hanging fruit, and then how you take that feedback and just continue to move your program forwards.
Yeah, really interesting. And I guess always putting yourself in the shoes of the stakeholders that you're engaging with, I think, and taking their, time and interest and so on into account. Really, really useful. Thank you very much for those insights for the moment. I wanted to move forward now and really look again in terms of very structural elements. Look at the IR team composition, look at some of the IR team backgrounds and what really the ideal mix may be in terms of size, but also skill set, and highlight some of those. I mean, what we can see already on the screen, that it's really, quite, fairly consistent in terms of what we're seeing in terms of team sizes. Of course, a lot is dependent on, large cap, small cap, mid cap, but we will look at that in a second as well in the next slide. But it's interesting. So when we look at, different kind of, countries within the MENA region, we see that a lot, larger groups of IR team members are in Saudi and in Greece. When we look at Turkey, for instance, or Kuwait, the UAE, these are, smaller teams, but yet, obviously very effective teams because they always, or at least for 2024, came on top in terms of, best in class with regards to the Extel rankings. So size doesn't always have to really mean anything, but it really kind of gives you some direction as to how you need to resource as well. Which we'll be looking on to the next slide. So when we think about, the kind of, skill set that you want or the experience that you want, historically, we can see that actually the large proportion comes with a finance background. And I think that's very true for a lot of the IROs that have been in IR for, 10, 15, 20 years. So you see that this is really the core kind of skill set that led to hiring IR individuals. Over the last few years, we've seen actually quite a shift in terms of using different types of skill set, and certainly skill set that really actually comes from the stakeholders of the corporates, really the buy side and the sell side. So you see here, for instance, as well with the top performing EMEA companies, you see that the sell side is actually a really dominant area that is being hired from, also the buy side as well. So this is really quite an interesting kind of development. Specifically, the buy side has happened much more recent. The sell side, I would say, is really kind of a result that emerged out of MiFID regulation, where a lot of sell side have moved into the IR space. But it's a very important, I think, perspective that sell siders are bringing. And then we get a lot actually coming from strategy as well. Because of course they can, whether they've done sort of M&A or other activities, it's really quite interesting because they will have, dissected and understood the business from all aspects and have the ability to then kind of, connect the dots and really communicate to the market in a very consistent and a robust way, which is, really important for investors, especially when they're, sector agnostic, for instance. We see here what the divide is in terms of buy and sell side engagement by team. So there's not a huge sort of discrepancy when we compare EMEA with MENA, but also even the top performing EMEA sort of teams, you can see that a large percentage actually has a very sort of evened out IR team structure where you have, 3 people are engaging with buy side and sell side. They have, quite a few people that are doing corporate access. So, the information that Nick was sharing in terms of being really scientific around targeting, all of this will be sitting in the corporate access teams, but also in terms of ESG, resourcing ESG, and meeting those increasing demands is really important, and they've obviously hired accordingly. Nick, I'm really interested to hear from you. Of course, again, having had sort of different teams and different skill set, what do you see as kind of the perfect mix in terms of skill set? And then if you think about your team structure, how do you allocate the different tasks, to the team?
Sure, no, very happy to take it. I mean, I think where I would start is I think you have to have a very diverse team, not in the context of, male or female ratios, but diverse experiences, right? I mean, it's really, really important to sit in a position whereby you've got different skill sets. And if I give you 2 sort of examples, right? So when we were at AstraZeneca, we had pharmaceuticals and healthcare is a very technical space. So it's not just about the ability to talk to a financial narrative, it's also about being able to talk to a scientific narrative. I think you also have to then step back and say, well, we have a specialist population that we're engaging with on both the buy and the sell side, but similarly, we also have a generalist population. So all of a sudden, you have a team that needs to have a diversity of thought in the way that it thinks, because you're going to have to service people in a very different way. So with Astra, we were lucky because we had people that had pure science backgrounds, so pharmacists. We had people that came from the sell side, so they had banking M&A experience. We had people that were coming from the internal part of the organization, so myself in that perspective, and you heard at the outset that my background was legal, strategy, business development and commercial, so again, brought a very different perspective. We had other people that were outside of pharmaceutical that joined the team. They'd come from sort of more consumer goods type experiences. And again, they brought a different perspective, because when you're articulating a very science-heavy narrative, what you need is somebody to sit there and say, actually, I don't understand that. What does that mean? Because if you think that sort of 60-70% of your engagement is a generalist, you've got to make science incredibly digestible. If I then think about how the world has sort of slightly shifted now, so my sort of previous experience at GSK, but also now with Fresenius, I think having sell-side experience in your team is incredibly important. At GSK, I had somebody that was Goldman Sachs spec sales for 20 years in healthcare, so obviously incredibly well connected. I've got currently somebody we've just employed from the sell side that is much more on the analytical side. But I think the areas where I'm seeing growth is much more around sort of communications and also social media. So both in GSK and also within Fresenius, I've now got a sort of smaller team which is working with the broader corporate team about how we position our financial results relative to the group, how we're engaging much more actively with investment communities and more so with, if you will, with the retail investment side. But similarly, both of those teams in GSK and also Fresenius, but also all the way back to AstraZeneca, had a very strong corporate access component, because I think as an IRO, you can't spend all of your time targeting and thinking about which conferences you need to be at. You need a team that is in effect building that success or that foundational layer that means that the IROs can then focus on the engagement and the building relationship perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, thank you for that. And Gülsen, I come to you as well, because you're also in a special position of having sustainability under your IR remit. Share with us a little bit about sort of the skills that you have on your team and how you kind of needed to upscale a little bit in terms of the skill set.
Sure. I think it also depends on, what responsibility your IR team is holding, because it changes from company to company. In our IR world at Telecom, we are responsible from the compliance to Capital Markets Board regulations. We are responsible from IR, core IR facilities like engagement, messages, and company story and all that, the messaging, and also the sustainability. And sustainability is not just a reporting function for us, it's also, strategizing the sustainability, forming the sustainability policy, forming the sustainability program, and monitoring it throughout, and making sure that we reach our goals. So when you have that kind of a mandate, I couldn't agree with Nick more, you needed the diverse. I think that's the golden word here, diverse background, people with diverse backgrounds. So we do have, compliance background people, we do have analysts in our team, because as I said, that messaging, and also we prepare the management for the messaging as well, and in that sense, guessing about what questions, what topics might be, in place within that specific period is important. That's why I think, it's really important to get that analyst mindset into the team. And we do have engineers because we are doing sustainability, as I mentioned. And I myself is, although telecom is a technology sector, it's also a consumer company, because we have got 52 million customers, and we need to understand how they behave and what they need. And in that sense, I think one of the things that I enjoyed a lot was my consumer analyst background in understanding the company when I first joined. So that's the kind of mix that we have, and how we try to fit in that sense.
Just out of interest, Gülsen, you are mid-cap, so how many people are on your IR team?
We have 8, sustainability and IR together.
It's also quite significant for mid-cap, so that's really, really good to see that. And because it's also an indication of how much this function is actually valued. So it's really positive.
And it's also a matter of, maybe we will talk about that, but IR role has evolved massively over time. You mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that the IR is a competitive advantage, and there is a study around that actually, which was issued by S&P Market Intelligence. They specify that companies with best-in-class IR trade at 34% premium relative to their peers, and trade with 37% less volatility. And those are massive numbers, particularly when you compare it to 5 years ago, which were respectively 15% and 5%. So IR has, evolved. The responsibility attributed to IR has evolved dramatically, and I think that's in our case, that 8 people in our team is exactly a consequence of that transformation, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of, one of the bigger shifts is as well the ability for IR to now also be present at board meetings. We will look at, board engagement in a minute as well, but this is a really important indicator how actually much IR is valued internally, and that take the feedback that IR actually brings from the market into the company seriously to help kind of shift and shape the company moving forward. So, and this is also something, and that's why I think the skill set and the experience does, play an important role. You'll find that people who have, the kind of, experience and can assert themselves, with management and position IR in a different way, that they will actually be given that platform. But we still see too many companies where IR doesn't have that kind of, isn't empowered in that same way. And I think this is an area where, still in the region and other areas, still needs to grow and improve. I wanted to, which, is similar to, or alongside the same vein, I guess, in terms of, how IR is valued internally, look at remunerations and budgets within IR. It's tricky to kind of, compare some markets with each other because they are so wildly different, and the economic trajectory is very, very different. But what is interesting, I guess, is when we look at the top performing EMEA companies here, that their actually salary brackets, or the majority of them, are actually sitting within, a much smaller kind of, salary or income universe. So it's not necessarily an indicator for great IR, but I think it's important, to kind of track those metrics, because obviously this role is evolving and it's progressing, and you need to kind of also understand what the career opportunities are within that, which is really important. And that's why also, forums and societies like MEIRA or TUYID or the UKR Society are so important, because they help professionalize the role and put it on the radar. I wanted to spend a few minutes as well on investor relations budgets, and just again give you an idea of how, again, top performing EMEA companies have actually large budgets. So they have quite a bit of resource in addition to the team size as well, to access tools and platforms to help them be more productive, to help them be more efficient. I'd love to hear from Gülsen as well, as a mid-cap company, what is the kind of budget situation in your company, and if you faced any kind of resistance from management in terms of increasing budgets, to access potentially new tools, whether this is for targeting capabilities, or maybe bringing in AI. What is the sort of circumstance within Turk Telekom?
Well, I would say I cannot complain. We have got every support from our board of directors and C-suite. And one of the examples to that was, amalgamating sustainability to IR, because it was considered the two functions had to go hand in hand within Turk Telekom structure itself. So we almost doubled the team size. And we do have a tool for benchmarking, and we do have a tool for database. The targeting, we were using a specific database. So those are paid products, but obviously, they are very useful for us because we are using those products on a day-to-day basis. Apart from that, on occasions where we think, getting some consulting from outside companies on a particular subject, we talk to the management and we justify our business case, and we always get some support for that. Unless we, go for something really, outrageous, which we do not do, of course. But I think, I'm in the lucky bracket of this, these graphics here, because as I said, IR at Turk Telekom has almost a VIP ticket and that supports us tremendously in where we are in what we do.
Absolutely. And I wanted to also bring in sort of how budgets are actually allocated in different markets. So you can see based on, again, if you remember in the first few slides, we were looking at the challenges and the priorities that companies are facing. So you can see here actually that some of the smaller markets like Oman, like Qatar, Egypt, Bahrain are really, focused on spending, their budgets towards actually investor targeting, where it's probably done through tools. And also, like Nick said, it's an art form. So you need to actually spend a little bit of time on, getting this right. But obviously the focus is there. Two of the area, yeah.
Obviously, I mean, it's not, I mean, it doesn't come all together, right? I mean, you go step by step. So, and I know that, I mean, not all of the companies are is at the same stages, right, in that. Right. So I think, I mean, it's important to prioritize. I mean, if you are building a budget, you prioritize what is really important for you, and you try to get the budget for that first. And once you achieve and show the results of that and the value add that your IR team and company can get out of that, then I think you are in a good position to, move to the next stage to ask for something different, something new, so something more value adding. So I think it doesn't come, all together, but I think it needs some time and effort. But I think it's doable, and the IR should have the power to convince company management to acknowledge that we do need someone to do this properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, I come to you, for your comments on that. I mean, we see obviously that, perception studies, these are areas that really take up a lot less of the budget. People are not spending as much, potentially as they should, in terms of, because one of the priorities again that we saw was feedback generation. What are your views on budget allocation and resourcing?
I mean, let me start from a position of saying budget doesn't equate to success, because I think it's really important to continue to innovate as an IRO. Let me give you some very tangible examples. I've sat in obviously mega cap companies with unlimited budgets and obviously large cap, and don't have the pressure. So I sit in a very privileged position. But I think there was sort of, as I was listening to the conversation, there was sort of a couple of things that were sort of jumping out at me. So one, feedback. It doesn't need to be through an external service provider, right? Everything we used to do in terms of post-roadshow collation of feedback, we actually used to run through Microsoft Forms. We created the templates ourselves, we would send it out, we would gather the feedback. Doesn't cost anything. Similarly, when we've actually used to run some of our events, which would be in person, so we would have the usual quarter, we would, in effect, in London, just offer a very sort of social post sort of quarter drinks event. And that was really because we'd recognized that the sell side had gone through a very intense period, and actually just to have management and the ability for everyone to decompress. Now, what we did was we were just using, again, free software that enabled us to send out the invitation, to register interest, and then take that back. And then the other piece that was sort of sitting with me, which is, again, it's not clever, but actually, if you think about the response it has for people, I think it's a really good example of why you don't necessarily need to have a significant budget to do this. So bear with me, because this is a bit scientific to a degree, but when we were at AstraZeneca, we had a potential medicine called Lynparza, which was going to be used for what's called DNA damage response. So basically what that medicine does is it attacks the cancer cell and in effect kills that cancer cell. Now, we were very lucky in Cambridge because there is a pub called the Eagle Pub, and it's where Sir Francis Crick basically came and pronounced his understanding of the double helix, which is DNA. So what did we do? We have this medicine, we need to get the market to understand it. So we invited all of the sell side to the pub. We had our chief scientist sit there and give a presentation. We had, inevitably it's the UK, right? So everyone's going to have a beer. But there was fish and chips, and we had our CEO and our CFO stood by the bar. And it was a very informal event, very little cost. It ended up being award-winning because it was so novel for what it did. But my message is, think about how you can innovate with your budget and do things differently. You don't need to spend at a premium to get the outcome you look for.
Absolutely. I love those tips. I love the tips as well in terms of, feedback generating after events that you can do, run and organize yourself. It's really not a big effort, a few, questions, but I think it's about being proactive about that and really, using, the engagement and the platform that you have as an IRO to really, gauge what the investor sentiment is. It's so important. I think it's key for you to manage, manage your budget. What do you need to focus on? What do investors want more from you? So I think that is really important to always, use that as the baseline. Now, moving on, we wanted to look as well, and you've just actually given a really good example of that in terms of investor events. So this is not necessarily only looking at big capital markets days. These could be, thematic events that you're hosting, and this is an area as well that came up as one of the top 10 priorities for MENA companies. It is an important platform for you to also, allow business leaders within the business to engage with the investor community, so they can really hear what different parts of the business are doing, how they're progressing, potentially new innovations. So it's a really important platform that should be leveraged to kind of create more exposure to your stock and give more granularity and information. Again, if we assume, and I think there's a larger percentage now in terms of, the investors being sector agnostic, any insights, any information, any sort of, efforts that you are doing to connect the dots of your business to give more transparency around where you're going is really important for the investor community. And using a platform like this is I think really quite important. You don't have to sort of think of an investor event as a 1 or 2 day event. It can be an hour or 2 hours. It can be a hybrid or a virtual event. But I think something that is really, really focused is really useful. So when we look at sort of the MENA region, we see that actually still quite a fairly large percentage doesn't actually do any investor events compared to the companies in EMEA. So it's much smaller. We see also companies in Turkey specifically that actually do events more than twice a year. So this is really quite important to, again, if we think of the benchmark, if you think about peer comparison and the competitive landscape that you're in, it really is also about visibility and standing out and differentiating yourself. And this, investor events like these can provide that opportunity. Nick, I come to you because you have a very specific view also on investor events, more so capital markets days. But lovely, would love to hear a little bit more about the kind of events, that you were also part of and what you thought was really effective.
Yeah, so I'm probably a little bit controversial in the sense of the statement I will make is that I don't believe in capital markets days. And the reason I say that is because, again, at least in healthcare, and again, if you think of it through the lens of disclosure, more often than not, capital markets days do not disclose price sensitive information. And I think there's often an expectation from the street going into it that they're actually going to learn something new. I can't quote the research off the top of my head, but I'm more than happy to share it. But there is research that does suggest that more often than not, capital markets days are value destructive versus value accretive. Now, the key point is that's not to say you should never do them, but they are very good for obviously setting a baseline in terms of information. And just to underscore the point, we did a capital markets day at AstraZeneca in 2014, and we never did one for another 10 years. So that gives you a sense of the sort of time between. So the question then becomes, what did you do? You've obviously just heard about the example at the Eagle Pub. But I think, Amani's right. There is this opportunity to really educate both sell-side and institutional investors, right? I mean, so, pharmaceuticals are incredibly complex. It takes time to obviously digest some of the content. So to do a day which is, maybe respiratory, cardiovascular, oncology, that's a lot of content. It's quite intense. So there was a very wise woman, otherwise known as my mother, that always used to tell me that you can't eat the elephant in one go. So if I take that as an analogy and in effect say, think about your business. What are the key components of that you can break down into small chunks, digestible chunks, that you can actually then disseminate into an investment community? So, just before I left GSK, we took the opportunity to do something around infectious diseases. It was a virtual event, But actually what we chose to do there, and this was building on learning actually from time at AstraZeneca, was we did it as almost giving people the opportunity to rotate between different virtual events. So there was an opening virtual event that was C-suite, they positioned it, and then there were 4 other virtual breakouts that people had the opportunity to attend. So one on chronic infectious diseases, one on bacterial infections, and it just meant that we had the same content, but it was virtually positioned slightly differently. Similarly, I've been in a scenario whereby it's been a very discrete event off a very discrete data point. So again, in the healthcare world, normally you have a regulatory approval or you have data that may be shared at a medical congress. Normally, these are 2 very important points in terms of inflections for share price. So consequently, you bring in maybe a key opinion leader, you bring in your management team, and you do it in much more of a holistic 360 degree. So you've got I'm a physician and this is how I treat my patients. I'm the individual that has just run this clinical trial and I'm really pleased with the outcome. And then you've got the corporate view. And at least the feedback we would often get is people really appreciate the fact that it's not just the corporate view. It's the ecosystem. It's a real 360 view of every perspective. And it means that, we're also not in a position where we're biasing the output per se, because we've got investors and sell side that can sit there and say to the key opinion leader or to the treating physician, will you use this medicine? We can't control their outcome in terms of what they say. They may say, well, yes, it's going to have more utilization in a community setting. So I think, again, my sort of recommendation would be just think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Try and innovate with the channel in what you're delivering, and really put yourselves in a position which is, if I were the attendee, what do I want to get out of it? And is it going to deliver on my requirements, rather than what I think we often see is this is the corporate requirements and we have to get this message out.
Yeah, absolutely. Gülsen, anything that you want to add from your experience?
I'm 100% with Nick on this one, because I don't think, events should be held for sake of holding them. If it's meaningful for you to do capital markets day, do it. But if it's, a repetitive event that is not benefiting anyone, then you can scrap it. I like Nick said, thematic events as well. Mm-hmm. One of the examples that we did, for example, was Turkey has moved to inflation accounting, and it was a nightmare. It still is a nightmare, I must say. We reported our numbers, but we did it in a differentiating way. We issued the set of numbers in historic numbers and with inflation accounting numbers, and then we showed every difference. Why is it changing, or why is it staying the same? Pre and post inflation accounting numbers. And I think that was really appreciated by the investor community and the analysts. And in the aftermath, we said, okay, this is too much information to digest. Let's hold an analyst meeting, because at the end of the day, those are going to be the ones to talk about the numbers and engage with the investors also to explain the numbers in inflation accounting. And we did a pure inflation accounting session with the analysts, and we tried to address their questions. And if we couldn't, we held one-on-one sessions, etc. So I think I like that kind of thematic response and events as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amani, can I just add one follow-on to Gülsen?
Yeah,
I think it's a really important piece, which is you're choosing your customer group, right? So just to, again, share a very real experience in many situations. So one of the things that I found incredibly helpful is when you've got news that you need to disseminate, whether it's positive or negative, and I'm very intentional to say positive or negative, because I think you need to do it in both scenarios. Where this idea started from was actually in a negative scenario, but led to a positive outcome in terms of positive share price appreciation of 5%. But where you do have things that you need to communicate, again, be very specific and targeted with who that is. So I can give it the example, whether it is from clinical data, whether it's from the approach of another company with regards to acquiring a component of our business. But the piece that we have repeatedly done and has been very, very successful is that at 7:30, when we have the news go out at 7, what we do is we basically build a book. So within that hour, 3 20-minute slots from 7:30 to 8:30. We invite sell-side analysts and spec sales, and this is important because spec sales is a loudspeaker into the market as much as the analyst. And then what we have is management and the IR team. 3 minutes max opening remarks, the rest is Q&A. And I think what you get to is a position whereby you've disseminated a message into the market very, very quickly and very, very effectively. You also have spec sales that are then saying, I've spoken to management, which is more often not something that they need to do. And then if you take that, and then again, it depends where you are in the world. For me, it's often been, we've had to do that at that time for the UK. We then have done it sort of around the 11:30 to 12:30 mark to pick up the US Open. And then because unfortunately, we also had some sell-side analysts that were on the West Coast, more often we would do it in 3 till 4. And it's a really effective way. It doesn't need to be a big event, right? It doesn't need to be a capital markets day. It doesn't need to be the hour, 2 hour longs that we're talking about. It can be very small, discrete events that just help you amplify your news.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll move quickly on to something that is important and we kind of already touched upon is the internal engagement with, key people in the business. And I think that kind of also makes IR more credible, more authoritative, having that access not only to the C-suite and be able to share insights and market information with the board, but also with the different business leaders that you're engaging with from the different departments. I think this is really important, and we understand from our previous research that about 38% of IR engagement is actually spent on nurturing and developing those internal relationships, and they're important because they're the ones that provide you with the insights and the information that you can then share with the market, and also important, when you have an ad hoc request from an investor that is more complex that you can't respond, you need to also have the right kind of contacts internally, to ask them those kind of questions and to get the right information from them. So you can see here what we're seeing in terms of the MENA kind of, trends is that, the UAE and Saudi really have very, very high frequency engagement, whether it's CFO, CEO, or board. So it's really quite, a positive, environment, and also an environment that, mirrors the importance that they see within IR, having that kind of, empowerment by the management and recognizing the value that IR can bring to the table. So it's really positive to see that. And I think, well, I don't necessarily, think, having to see the CEO or CFO daily is that critical. But I think, having the openness and the readiness, for them to engage with IR and hear their thoughts on what's going on is really, really important. Would love to go to Gülsen in terms of your engagement internally and what that means to you, and sort of where I guess more the stronger relationships are, perhaps where you think you should be engaging more frequently or nurture those relationships stronger. What is it at Türk Telekom? What does it look like?
I think this is really, really important, this slide. I mean, the IR's engagement with the management and the board, because at the end of the day, I mean, there is bread and butter for IR internally, and that's a good interaction with the C management and the departments as well, because at the end of the day, the success of IR is dependent on the IR being well informed. And also, I mean, IR becoming in time a proxy for the C-suite. And that's actually, I mean, goes back to my statement about, I mean, how IRO role has transformed over time. In old days, I mean, there were fewer investors around. I mean, they had more engagement with CEOs and CFOs. CEOs and CFOs were able to perhaps, address more meetings on percentage basis, but it's not possible anymore. So IR now has to become a proxy for the management, and that is, how you can ensure by engaging with the CEO, CFO on a regular basis and the board on a regular basis. So I'm part of the finance team, so it's almost like, a day-to-day, engagement for me with the CFO, but also with the CEO as well very frequently, because again, IRO is now a very strategic function. You have got the analytical look, you have got the strategic look, and you have got the business curiosity. You are engaging with the departments, and you have got the financial acumen and all that. So that makes you someone that actually the management wants to, interact with and engage in terms of, I mean, how this and that we are going to do will look from the outside world. And that's where IR also, I mean, plays a very critical role in terms of its, I mean, bridging in both ways, from the outside world to inside and the other way around, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gülsen. Nick, your views on that?
I mean, so for me personally, I mean, interaction with both CEO and CFO is probably sort of in that daily to weekly bucket. I mean, board is sort of more around sort of, I would say, every other month or sort of more quarterly. I think, again, sort of my reflection is that, you know, Gülsen's point is spot on. We are a very strategic function. We are the only function that engages with the external world to the same degree, you know, in terms of understanding insights and perspectives from a capital market standpoint. So I sort of slightly turn it on its head and think about, you know, how do you in effect demonstrate value? And I think the value that you can bring to both your CFO and CEO can be in a couple of different sort of perspectives. One can be, and it depends obviously on their experience, it can be from a sort of coaching and mentoring standpoint, which I know might sound a bit strange, but, you know, at least for me right now and in previous experiences, we've had sometimes CFOs that don't have capital markets experience. So you can obviously help them to understand that. I think also from a CEO perspective, I think, again, the value that you can bring is regards to market insights, but also thinking about what's happening from a competition and a macro standpoint, more as a kind of, we need to think about this from a strategy standpoint. What are the implications? So again, super important. You know, I think it's important that we talk about the value that the program brings and the way that you are executing. But I think there's also this piece which is just being the, I'll call it the provocateur, right? It's holding up the mirror of the outside world to both members of management and helping them understand what are the changes that need to happen to move forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We come now to investor engagement. And this is one of the things that we all mentioned in terms of, you know, metrics that you can, you know, use year on year, month to month in terms of tracking your performance and benchmarking that against, you know, your sector peers. So what you can see here in essence, for the different regions, you can see the one-on-ones, the number of sell-side events, and they can be physical or virtual events. So both fall into that. The number of events that the companies are hosting, and that can be also, again, we're talking about, you know, fireside chats, you know, could be workshops, it could be thematic events, you know, a site visit, so anything really within that realm. And then, of course, non-deal roadshows. So you can see that there's quite a discrepancy in terms of, you know, how MENA is positioned against, you know, some of the top performing emerging EMEA peers. And I think, you know, again, if we think about you know, the competitive landscape that you're in, you need to kind of step up and out to be able to be seen, for your stock to kind of, you know, stand out and your story to stand out. So I think, you know, getting that level of interaction and market engagement to a level, you know, that is on par with some of your peers is really quite critical in terms of just maintaining that visibility. And then, of course, you need to build on the quality of your deliverables for sure. So like Nick said, you know, budget doesn't necessarily mean, you know, a good IR program, nor does actually the high frequency of engagement necessarily imply that you're doing a great job. So it has to be a balance between the two. And we can also see here as well in terms of just the attendance, we see, you know, really strong IR only events, but also really positively. And this is something that has actually very quickly progressed in the MENA region to have CEO, CFO visible, even some of the board members attending. So this is, you know, something that we are seeing a lot more demand of in terms of, you know, investor requests for specific board members, specifically around, you know, of course, governance related issues. So this is an area of real interest. I'd love to hear your feedback, Gülsen and Nick, on that as well, in terms of, you know, just the level of market engagement that you have, and whether you actually do, you know, get board on the road with you, and also, do you do any kind of governance roadshows? Because this is a big area in Europe. Some companies have been doing governance roadshows for decades, and others are really coming new to it. But it's a really important and strategic way of engaging with your top, investors, bringing the chairperson along with you, the CSR team on the road, and IR, to kind of talk way before AGM naturally. So this is really important, and do it, on multiple occasions. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Perhaps we start with Gülsen and then Nick.
Yeah, I think, you made a great summary here in terms of, the numbers are important, yes, but the outcome of those numbers and how you track those outcomes is really important. Yes, we do roadshows with the management, CEO, CFO, and I go on the road myself as well. What is really important is for perhaps an IRO is keep an eye on the investors if they are keen on getting the meeting absolutely with the CEO and the CFO, or are they happy to take a meeting with IR? That's a good, self-assessment, I would say. Also, the numbers here, try to track if they are producing a result where people see IRO or IR function as IR as a well-informed proxy, as I said before, for the C-level management. And what is really important for me, and this was the case when I was a research analyst as well, and still the case hasn't changed, being a credible, trusted, and trusted partner for the investors and for the analysts. So, in the aftermath of this interaction that you put a lot of effort on, do they see you as someone like that? Because I think it's really important how you engage with the investors and how they see you from outside. We are obviously, as IR people, we have to have a compelling vision, but we also should refrain from being cheerleaders. So that puts you, I think, in a position where investors you build credibility and trust with investors. And your responsiveness, when you interact with the investors, do you actually, give them the information that they like to hear from you? And are you elaborate enough to satisfy that curiosity with the investors? So I think the numbers are really important here, but the outcome of these numbers, what they are translating into in terms of your perception, as your program's perception and your perception as an IRO is really what matters.
Excellent. Nick, any sort of brief comments that you have on that?
Yeah, I think I'd just add a couple. So one, I think you can start from a position of just having a broad rule of thumb in terms of your interactions, right? So if you think about CEO, CFO, maybe you want to sit there and say, I'd like CEO to be in the US at least 2 times a year. I want CFO to be in Europe 2 times a year. So I think if you can have some sort of broad framework. The other piece that I was sort of thinking through listening to Gülsen is, and also your comment before, Amani, in terms of sort of quantum versus quality. So at the outset, I think you heard me say that we did somewhere in the region of about 1,900 events at GSK, right? Which is a massive number. But one of the pieces of work that we did is that we would look at the ability to take a top 100 position versus the ability in terms of how sort of quick or fast that money was, or how long only they were focused. And that analysis basically meant that we would look at something like, and again, this is very healthcare specific, there's an invitation only event that would come from T row, and it was BlackRock, Wellington, T row. And we would always prioritize that. Very small number of attendees, massive AUM, massive ability to obviously be a top 10 shareholder. Whereas you look at maybe a conference, for example, in Miami, I won't name the bank that hosts it, but it's very fast money. So consequently, we would direct our resource in terms of IR, because it was important that we were there, relative to thinking about management. So again, I think what you can do is just start from a piece of strategy. You can think about the role of data, and you can think about, how you actually want to improve the access, again, from a customer-led perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're going to run through some of these, but I wanted to, Nick, hear from you, because obviously targeting was one of the, big topics, both a challenge and a priority for this year. You mentioned it earlier. It's an art form. on which I will quote you in the future now. But I would love to kind of understand your approach. If you can, take sort of, step by step, just giving us an idea of what that looks like, because obviously it is a priority. We're seeing that obviously top EMEA, companies are really doing a great job at really doing prospect targeting. We're not seeing that picking up so much within the MENA region, and we saw that, in terms of budget allocation towards targeting as well earlier. But love to hear from your view now in terms of, what is the targeting, step-by-step approach.
Yeah, no, I'll sort of try and keep it quite systematic as well. I mean, first and foremost, I think you've got to look at it at a global lens. I don't think you want to be limited by a regional bias, if you will. I think you have to then look at each of the financial centres and you have to work out what is the AUM in each of those. So obviously, for argument's sake, if you were going to go to the US, clearly you're going to spend time on the East Coast, clearly you're going to spend time on the West Coast, but there are pools of money elsewhere in the country where you do want to spend time. Then if you think of, so you've kind of got a framework in terms of, if I had to rank those destinations, this is how it would look. Then you sit there and say, you know what, we've got maybe there's more than 30,000 financial institutions out there. That's a massive number. How do I get to something that's much more manageable? So we actually work with a third-party service provider, and I've worked with them for probably the last 10 years. And they are not, if you will, the silver bullet or the panacea when it comes to targeting, but I just really like the way that they do this. I think to have obviously a very clear view in terms of who are your peers in your respective sector, what are the fundamentals of that, whether it's, growth rates, whether it's net debt EBITDA ratio, whatever it might be. Think about that. Similarly, if you were to look outside of your sector, what would be the equivalent companies? So, at least if I think about, right now for me, there's obviously somebody like a Sandoz, for example, that are based in Switzerland. They're in our sector. So that would be like a sector peer. But then maybe there's somebody in tobacco or alcohol that has a very similar financial fundamental profile. Build those two things. Get screens that then get you to a point which in effect gives you a more manageable number, and I would bet you could probably get to somewhere in the region of maybe sort of 300 to 400. And I think, again, you'll probably need to work with either a third-party service provider, or you can also take some of the insights from respective banks. UK has a slightly different setup where we have the privilege of having house brokers, so they're almost like a sort of third party, but anybody you're speaking to on the banking side should be able to help. I think then you've got to this point where you sit there and say tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1, prioritize for management. Tier 2, management and or IR. Tier 3, IR only. And then for me, it's really a case of just making sure that you work your way through that and you prioritize those. So we were talking earlier in terms of sort of managing the effectiveness of an IR program. For me, I sit there and say for the tier 1 targets that we've identified, as a minimum, we meet them twice a year. It's actually more in reality, but that's the minimum. And I think the other piece is you've also got to look at your register. You've got to think about where the volatility and the risk resides in your register. So this is why I sort of start in a place which is, it's not a science, right? You've got to kind of have a feel for it. You can work with third parties, you can build banks, you've got your own experience. Collapse all of those things together, but just be super systematic in terms of how you execute.
Amazing. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. We'll move on very quickly to sell-side engagement, which is very important for the region. We see a large proportion, over 71%, are actively seeking sell-side coverage. Gülsen, from your perspective, and obviously having been in that space, what are the best ways of securing sell-side coverage? How do you engage with sell-side? What are sort of the best methods that you see in terms of securing that and getting visibility on that?
I think I will mention what you mentioned earlier. I mean, MiFID has changed some of the things in this landscape. So perhaps it's not as easy as it used to be in the past. So you really need to, work for this. And it's not going to happen from today to tomorrow. Because, again, the landscape has changed. There are so many companies out there with very good IR functions, and everyone has evolved and improved in that sense. So you need to be one step ahead to have a compelling story, and then you should be doing first of all a benchmarking study. Again, this is similar to targeting. You look into your peers, who is covering them, and both, locally and internationally, and you should start engaging with those analysts now. Again, it's going to take time because it takes time to understand the company, and you have to interact with them in a reasonable, frequency. But you should not be discouraged by, not getting to where you want to get in a very short period of time. I think, it's equally important to get, your stock covered by the international analysts, but also the local analysts. They have the local flavor, and they add a lot of value. So you should be, engaging with the both parties, both tranches similarly.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, you need to have a strategy for sell-side engagement as well as buy-side engagement. I think it's important. These are two stakeholders that need to be engaged with and interacted with, maybe on different forums, platforms, and levels. But I think it's important to take a strategic view on the sell side, which is. I wanted to very quickly go over ESG because we can't not talk about this. But I think it's important to see that, again, when we compare the MENA region with other markets, the top EMEA companies really have aligned in terms of strategic KPIs for ESG with actually the strategic goals of the company in terms of managing remuneration internally for board and executive management. And I think it's a really important indicator. We're seeing that actually still a large proportion of companies in the MENA have only just actually started their journey into investor relations. So it's something that is obviously growing, but obviously the market is changing very quickly on ESG. In some areas, it's really the interest has really declined. In other areas, it kind of remained the same year on year. So it's probably for a lot of corporates, it's a different, difficult kind of landscape to navigate. But when we look at what are the top, I guess, pressing issues are, we're still ESG disclosure is a big thing, and it's very complex. And we know that a lot of teams within the MENA region have also resourced to get expertise and outside expertise help on that. Any comments from Nick or Gülsen on ESG? Generally or specifically on those kind of subject matters and challenges?
Gülsen, you go, and I have a comment I can add.
Okay. Well, I think it's a must-have now, to be perfectly honest. And we have gone through a lot over the last 2 years in Turk Telekom. It's building it. It was like building it from the scratch. You first try to understand how you should approach this subject as a company. What is your role in this? And then you try to make it systematic, because it's a huge subject, and it's you can easily lose track of that in terms of what you want to achieve. But I will not bore you to the details of what we've gone through, but I think it's really important because it has got tangible outcomes. ESG, how you can turn it into a benefit, and that happened when we issued our first inaugural sustainability bonds into 2024, and it was very challenging because it came together with the inflation accounting change. So we were trying to prepare for the sustainability bond for the first time, and also trying to present the numbers in inflation accounting. So we were a little bit late to the market. Some of the other Turkish corporates have issued their bonds as well, and we were thinking, is the investor going to take another exposure from another Turkish company? Are we being late here? Actually, we were not late in itself, but we were late in the market in terms of issuing our bond, and it was not the case at all. The book was subscribed 5 times, and that, I think, was not solely, but this ESG component had a role there, because I think we created some scarcity value there. There were not many senior companies out there issuing sustainability bonds, and that created some stickiness in the book from the clients, investors' perspective. So and we were at the same time able to tighten significantly, and the book did not disintegrate. That showed us that although it is very difficult to quantify, we thought that there was some greenium in that deal. So you can change it into an advantage. And going back to the targeting point, I think, I mean, in old days, there were more boutique funds, like, I mean, for Turkey's case, maybe it's not the case for Nick, but we had the Turkey funds, we had the Baltic funds, EMEA funds, etc. Now it all merged into EMEA funds and GEM funds. So it has become more and more competitive to try and grab the attention of the investors as a company, because you're in the same pool with everyone else. And in that sense, I think ESG can be another, edge that you may want to use in capturing both the bond investors and the equity investors.
Amazing, thank you.
Well, I feel like my comment's going to be slightly controversial, but I'm going to say it regardless. I think, you know, I've been engaged with ESG for the last decade. I think Gulsen's point was spot on. I mean, I would characterize as sort of table stakes, right? We have to have a position on ESG. That said, I think what I've observed in the post-COVID world, and also, you know, everyone will be very aware of the current geopolitical macroeconomic environment that we're in. ESG does seem to be losing ground in terms of its relevance, right? So I guess my message to you is, do what you need to do, but don't go above and beyond. I think you have, you know, there was a world whereby I think we were doing a lot more. Think about your data, because again, you know, if you're a smaller team, I think you have to just think about, you know, do you really want to spend your time managing ESG versus targeting and spending time with investors? One of the things that we did at Astra to try and minimize the amount of incoming inquiries is we actually built a very specific data tool that people could basically go and get the content from. And it was an idea to, in effect, as far as was practical, to try and automate the ESG rating surveys. So, you know, as much as I want to say it's really, really important, it is, but it's not where I'm spending my time now. And that probably gives you a sense of how I'm really thinking about it.
Thank you, Nick. Amazing. And I'm almost going to leave the floor to you again here, Nick. AI is obviously an area that is, certainly a focus area for a lot of IR teams to ensure that some of the, more mundane tasks can be, made more efficient, collaboration amongst teams, the productivity level to increase. So it obviously the impact of AI is kind of understood. How to start it and what to do with it is probably less clear. What we're seeing in terms of our research, a huge chunk of individuals and percentage that are really considering it now. So they're reviewing different tools and platforms, and still quite a few that are very reluctant of to engage in that. So those that are engaging with it already are using primarily for content creation and syndication. So these are, whether these are translation tools that are being used, or the speedy and succinct and consistent issuance of any kind of press releases, earnings releases, presentation material. So it's really more around content focused, as well as crafting a succinct and comprehensive and easy understood equity story as well. So these are the areas that we currently are seeing. I imagine this will very quickly change over the next year and this year even. But we have seen in the MENA region, that they're very quick adopters in terms of technology generally. So we will see this probably accelerate quite quickly as well. Nick, let's hear it from you on AI.
If I may, sorry, Nick, if I may interject, we have hands up from Rayan. I think he has a question for us.
Sure. Hi, Rayan.
Assalamu alaikum. Ahleen, hello, Amani. How are you?
Good.
So my name is Rayan Qar'awi. For those who don't know who I am, I'm one of the oldest IR professionals in Saudi. I'm a board member in MEIRA, and I'm also the chairman of the Saudi chapter of MEIRA. My point was actually a while back. Thank you for catching that, Deborah. Amani is focused, so يعطيك العافية. No, my point was regarding to what Nick was saying on ESG, and I see that I agree with all of you on ESG, and I see that there is now a point to waving off from the focus on environmental to no end, to now being a bit more rational on ESG, and remembering that there is to ESG there are two other items. governance and social. And social doesn't have to be exactly what is being practiced in the West. So in our part of the world here, what we are seeing that we're doing a rationalization. When you look at the IFRS, they've been implementing the S1 and S2 environmental guidelines to IFRS. These have not been implemented in our region yet, and we are looking to implement these in due course. But now there's talks by SOCPA and other organizations that they will actually focus on making them more region relevant. We see that we don't no longer see this in this region that we're just going to copy paste whatever comes up in terms of best practices, but we'll make it more relevant to us here. And of course, us and the rest of the region here. So we're not just talking about the Middle East with couple of 100 million, but even including India, and which is another 1 billion plus people. So a huge part of the population of the world in this region. And I see that ESG is very important to maintain, especially in Saudi Arabia and this part of the world, where as our culture actually emphasizes that if you look at ESG, it's basically Sharia implemented into what we're actually doing, but we're keen on not speaking about these things in our part of the world. And I think it's very important that when you're a public company, you actually speak about it. If this is your private investments, your private money, then please do it with as you please. But when it's a public company, your shareholders want to know what's going on. So it's very relevant to have ESG. It's very relevant to speak about what the companies are doing. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that in this part of the world, there's a rationalization, and we are visiting and with the exchanges, with the capital market authorities, looking at bringing ESG in a way that we are comfortable with and that we're happy with. And I just wanted to thank you, because I have to log off now. I just want to thank you all for your input and great speeches. And I like the contradictory from the German side here. So I keep contradicting because I think you have to question things all the time. One of my biggest questions, and Amani knows this well from being part of the Capital Market Forum Awards, I don't like the IR applications, the apps for IR. But that's my contradictory point of view. I don't like IR apps. I don't believe investors look at IR apps, honestly. But that's just one of the things that I think.
Agree.
Oh, thank you so much. Another one. Good. One more to the fight. So thank you very much, everybody. And just wanted to highlight that one point. And thank you for your time. I'll have to log off. I just wanted to bring that point across. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Great comment. Move on to AI very quickly before we close up and see whether the other people have some questions.
Keep it super concise, Amani. I mean, I think, look, this probably needs a webinar in its own right. But I mean, if I at least think about adoption, I'd probably put it into 3 buckets. One would be first, genuine adoption of technology. I think you have to think about, what are you doing from an IR perspective? What are your processes? Where does technology actually have a role and can make a difference? 2, I think it's then about automation. So really think about what can you do in your process of, for example, outreach to investors. Can you automate, for example, the way we use our CRM system? There's this sort of a pre-meeting email that goes, we're really looking forward to meeting you. Are there any questions that you have in advance? So we automate that. We have the meeting. There's a follow-up email that happens. It's automated. It's, thanks for a great meeting. Please fill in any feedback. By the way, during the meeting, you mentioned A, B, and C. So we attach relevant documents. So it's really about how do you sort of automate your overall processes. And again, you can obviously look at it through the lens of the quarter. And the third piece is then AI, right? What is the role of AI? So AI is also in the automation piece. We've automated, for example, all of our social media content and creation to AI. We are using it at the moment. I was yesterday building personas for CEOs and CFOs within our internal ChatGPT environment. So that was from a competitor perspective in terms of trying to think how our competitors would react to whatever the question is that I'm asking, but also then what would our CEO or CFO internally say on certain items. So again, I think there are opportunities there. I think the biggest lift or benefit I've seen of AI, and I think this is not going to come as a surprise to anybody, but just in terms of the synthesization of information in such a quick manner. So, at GSK, we built a proprietary tool that basically synthesized all of the sell-side research. It saved us probably 4 or 5 hours of an individual's time a week. And it would distribute an automated email to management, which was just a synopsis of everything that sell-side had said. And the other way that I'm using AI at the moment is I'm currently exploring Notebook LM, using public domain information, but really plugging in sort of a lot of the big four's comments around healthcare in terms of they often write an annual view, this is where healthcare is going to go. Notebook LM gives me the opportunity when traveling now to listen to the conversation as to how that sort of thematic shift is changing in healthcare. And the only other comment I would make is spend time, effort, and energy with AI policy. How's it going to be used? What's the governance? And then really thinking through how you sort of use your data. And I think this is where you end up being a bit of a librarian, because you've got to really create these data lakes that are very specific, whether it's CEO speeches, whether it's Q&A. So you've got to do this sort of curation piece. So that's what I would say, Amani, in very quick order.
Fantastic. No, really, really appreciate the insight, because I think it's important. It's an area that is growing, and people are certainly looking at it. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the key takeaways. You will have them as part of the presentation. I just wanted to spend a moment on basically the 2025 survey that we've just completed, which obviously delivers the MEIRA awards, and just give you some highlights very quickly on that. You will know, obviously, that there are the buy side and sell side assess you across various qualitative metrics. We have seen year on year a humongous increase in terms of voter participation. So 28%. Last year, it already increased by 22%. So this is really a reflection of the quality of investor relations that is now being delivered in the market. The companies are being recognized for the work that they are doing, for the engagement that they're doing, for C-suite visibility. We can see here that even C-suite nominations have increased, IRO nominations have increased. It's a really very, very strong performance from MENA companies, and we can see, where there have been, year-on-year improvements. Well, not improvements, but actually voter increases by geography, by sector. Again, you can review this in your own time when you receive the presentation. We even have a new entry from Morocco, which is exciting as well. So, I mean, it looks, overall really quite positive in terms of voter participation increase out of the UA, the UK, the US, really key markets in terms of participation. So it's a very, very exciting, survey this time around with, great level, increased level of participation and evaluation of corporates. Again, mirroring the efforts that you're bringing to the table and how you have optimized over the last, year or so, your investor relations practices. So I'm going to close here, and thank you all very much for your time. I thank Gülsen and Nick so much for your input, your insights, your experience, and your knowledge. I think, all of this theoretical knowledge and insights that we're sharing is one thing, but actually getting the practical and tangible experience from both of you has been absolutely invaluable. And I really appreciate your time and effort in doing this event. And I really appreciate everybody's attendance. We actually held on to them for a long, long time, for over an hour. Over 50 participants. So appreciate your time. I hope you found this useful and valuable. Any questions, please feel free to contact us. If anybody wants to say something before Deborah shuts off the link, please use the time now. Good. Well, thank you very much, MEIRA, for organizing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amani, Gülsen, and Nick. It was a very insightful and a thought-provoking session. I will be sharing the slide deck like Amani said, and thank you all for attending. I hope you found it enjoyable. I look forward to seeing you all next week on Wednesday with digital interaction and stakeholders. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
so
for
much.
having us.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.